Good afternoon, folks. We're about to get started here. Welcome to the Improving Transit Safety, a New Mandate under MAP-21 session. I'm going to make a couple of announcements, just kind of technical announcements. Remind everybody to please put their cell phones off or just on vibrate. And just for the YouTube, FTA YouTube channel, we're going to be filming this session. So if you do have any questions, please come up to the microphone. We do want to hear what you have to say. It's my great pleasure to introduce our administrator at FTA, Peter Rogoff, who will be moderating this session. And again, this is going to be a very interactive session, so I encourage everyone to move forward. If you haven't, if you're sitting back there, we don't bite, come on forward. Peter Rogoff, I give you Peter Rogoff.
Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome. If you are here for the session on cold weather performance of aggregate enhanced asphalt, you're in the wrong place. About every other hearing, every other room will have such presentations, so I'm glad we can gather here to talk about transit safety today. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank our guests. We're going to do this session in a little bit of a different format than you may be accustomed to at TRB events. Rather than have each one of our panelists give a lengthy presentation with questions all saved at the end, we're going to try a slightly different format to make it a little bit more interactive, a little bit more vibrant. So I am going to speak briefly on FTA's new transit safety responsibilities as given to us under the MAP-21 Surface Transportation Law, just signed into law this past July. I'm then going to introduce each one of our panelists individually. Each one will come up and speak for about 5 minutes. They'll go through their slides rather quickly. We'll then have maybe 1 or 2 questions about their presentation specifically. We'll go through those 3 individuals, and then what I think is probably the most important part of the session, there'll be an opportunity to have a wide-ranging discussion involving the audience with all kinds of Q&A on any aspect of the transit safety challenge and what we're contemplating at the FTA. I want to emphasize one thing really more than any other. Let me just say, and at the conclusion of that, Vince Valdez, our Acting Associate Administrator for Safety and Oversight, will also sort of bat cleanup and give us some summary remarks. I want to emphasize importantly that, to my mind, this session will be a failure if all of the information goes this way. We are in a very unique opportunity that I'll discuss in a couple of minutes in having a new authorization that is broad. It provides flexibilities. It does so quite deliberately given the nature of the industry that we're seeking to provide safety enhancements. And I know that there are a great number of people in this room that have experience in the transit safety field, both whether it's as governing boards, as administrators, as academics. And I certainly hope one of my reasons for wanting to enhance the time available at the end for back and forth between the audience and the panel is because I think we all have a great deal to learn. And we really want to go about and put forward this new transit safety regime from the federal government in a very thoughtful, value-added, and non-bureaucratic way. So let me take a minute to talk about how we got here. Back in the summer of 2009, the administration had only been in office a few months, and we had the tragic Red Line Fort Totten metro crash that killed 9 individuals, including the operator, and injured a great many more. But even before that time, the FTA was focused with concern about a number of incidents in places like the CTA in Chicago, the T in Boston, Muni in San Francisco, where there were incidents, some fatal, some not, some that had the very high potential for fatalities. In the universe of transit agencies who were, to the extent that they were regulated for safety at all, regulated by the 27 separate state safety organizations that we have out in the 27 states that operate a rail transit system of some kind. This sort of loophole in federal safety oversight was made all the more glaring, obviously, by a very severe and fatal crash in the nation's capital. When you think about it, so just by way of legislative background, the Federal Transit Administration and UMTA before it was prohibited by law, from a law dating back to 1964, from issuing any safety regulations or minimum standards of any kind. In fact, the agency tried at one time, and it was litigated, and it was a court finding that made that determination. When you think about the fact that 8 times as many passengers use rail transit than use both Amtrak and the commuter railroads every day, Amtrak and the commuter railroads being regulated by the Federal Railroad Administration. And indeed, under rail transit in that unregulated universe, we carry 6 times as many passengers as is covered by aviation every day in the United States. Clearly, there was a role for the federal government to play in at least providing for minimum safety standards, especially when you reflect on the fact that we are the majority capital investor in a great many of those systems. Certainly the vast majority of those systems, we are the major capital investor. We are providing them a great deal of money for capital, and obviously the smaller the system, the larger our percentage investment. But we had nothing to say in terms of how they spent it as it relates to safety. The result of that, through the leadership of Secretary LaHood and a task force that was set up and chaired by Deputy Secretary Porcari, was legislation that the administration formally transmitted to Congress in December of 2009 to, in fact, close this loophole and give the FTA limited but important transit safety regulatory authority. Importantly, and I don't think we even appreciated how importantly at the same time as Secretary LaHood and I testified before House and Senate committees on this new legislation, Secretary LaHood set up the Transit Rail Advisory Committee for Safety, or TRACS. It's a formal advisory committee under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and they got to work. We put out a solicitation for members and got a great many true transit professionals, some from academia, some from transit agencies, some from the state safety organizations themselves, as well as others, and got them to work on starting to develop concepts of what a new transit safety authority would look like if and when we got the legislative authority that we were seeking. We have really benefited now that we have been granted that authority through MAP-21 from the work that TRACS has done over the last couple of years. And indeed, 2 of our 3 panelists here today are members of TRACS. So one of the reasons that I asked them to speak today. So MAP-21 was a breakthrough piece of legislation when it came to transit safety and the federal role in it. We are going to now be in a position to establish minimum standards, working through our state safety organization partners. We feel at this point, as you might imagine, with MAP-21 now being fully implemented, the joke we use is we feel like the dog that caught the truck. We've been chasing this truck and barking about it for more than 2 years. Now we've caught it, and we have to figure out what we're actually going to do with it. And that's a large part of why I say this session this morning will be, this afternoon will be most beneficial to us if we hear from you as well as you just hear from us. We will have a great amount of public outreach as we launch this initiative. We are required by law, a unique blessing that FTA has that some of the other modes do not have. We are required by law to put all of our major pieces of guidance and regulation out for notice and comment. But we view that, especially in this instance, as an opportunity. Our real challenge, if I could summarize it very briefly, is how we establish a regime that improves safety and does not add bureaucracy, does not just add process, some of those major mind-numbing processes that FTA has come to be known for, that we've been now about the business of streamlining under the Obama administration, where we really truly enhance safety in a mode that by and large is safe. And that's something that we need to constantly remind people when we talk about this, and we constantly reminded Congress. Transit is a very safe mode. The records of fatalities and injuries is a good one, certainly one to be envied by a great many other modes. At the same time, there is room for improvement, and when we have those catastrophic failures, they're big. And especially with the challenges we have with skilled staff people in our transit agencies retiring in increasing numbers, in the fact that we have state of good repair challenges that are becoming more acute at some of the agencies that carry the overwhelming majority of passengers. One of the things that Hurricane Sandy has recently sort of reminded America is how much a transit ridership is concentrated on just a dozen agencies, 2 or 3 of whom, maybe 4 of whom, are all concentrated in the New York, New Jersey area. So when I've talked about Hurricane Sandy as the largest transit disaster in the history of the country, I've had to remind people that the more even the day after Hurricane Sandy, more than half of the available transit trips in America were not available. But even a few days later, when Boston and Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and Baltimore came back online, well over a third of the nation's transit trips were still not available. So we have agencies with very acute state of good repair needs, aging equipment, the need to really get a handle on where all their assets are and how to prioritize them, and a great many riders at stake. So that is the great challenge that our agency now faces with this new authority. Like I said, we are working through our state safety organization partners. The Obama administration did not get everything it wanted. In some ways, the authority that we were given in MAP-21 was more narrow than we requested. In other areas, it was more expansive. So you'll note, we set up an advisory committee called the Transit Rail Advisory Committee for Safety. That wasn't just because it made a good acronym. It's because we really intended to focus our efforts overwhelmingly on rail. And when the Secretary LaHood and I testified on behalf of this initiative, we talked about our plan to focus on rail, but we asked for the authority to perhaps also get into transit bus operators should we feel it necessary at a later time. Congress did not follow our lead on that. They gave us the authority broadly for both rail and bus, and are now requiring the submission of safety plans to the FTA by every transit operator, rail and bus, large and small. So we have, in some ways, an even more expansive responsibility than we thought. A couple of the other challenges we're facing right now is not just how to conceive of this the right way out of the box, but obviously resources. The FTA has historically been a lean and mean organization is the best way I could put it. The fact that we put out $10.5 billion every year over multiple grant programs with a staff of fewer than 550 people, I think would show us to be about as lean and mean as a federal agency gets. We obviously are now expanding in a new line of business. Thankfully, the Obama administration budget has sought additional staffing for the agency, specifically to be brought to bear on this transit safety challenge. But we're still waiting for Congress to act, obviously. We're still waiting for a final 2013 appropriation. And we obviously also have the looming threat of a sequester over our head at the same time. Finally, and fortuitously, Congress did give us something that we did ask for as far as being able to fund our partners in the states through whom we are supposed to do this initiative. They did give us the authority to draw down 0.5% of the funding we put out through our Section 5307 formula program to provide direct funding through the state partners. I apologize if some of you have heard me rant on this before, but the reality is that the 27 state safety organizations that we have right now, with the exception of 2, maybe 3, are extraordinarily weak, extraordinarily understaffed, do not have the expertise, the staffing, or the infrastructure to really do the job that they were charged with doing, much less the expanded job that we now hope and expect them to do under this new regime. And in large part of that challenge is funding. Literally, with the exception of 2 SSOs in the United States, if you take those 2 out of the equation, and Georgetta Gregory used to work for one of them, the average staffing size of the state safety organizations that were charged with doing this is less than 1 FTE per year. What that meant, in reality, is that within many state DOTs, this requirement to establish an SSO resulted in a state transportation commissioner telling someone down in the transit division that, oh, by the way, you're also supposed to sign these papers as the head of the SSO. And the regime was not much stronger than that in some states. That is now all going to change, and in fact, one of the first regulatory products we are charged with putting out is one that identifies what state safety organizations we will certify to be able to oversee and implement federal regulations. We will be sending them money to build their strength. That's the good news. We need to be very clear with them in terms of what kind of staffing, expertise, and importantly, legislative authority that they have. When we had our first hearings on this, then Chairman Jim Oberstar brought forward a very valuable chart that showed that these 27 state safety organizations in the states had vastly differing authorities in terms of the ability to enforce anything within their own state and actually compel the attention of the transit operators they were supposed to oversee. And in an issue that we have now will be forbidding as part of the MAP-21 rules, some of these state safety organizations were actually deriving their funding from the transit agencies they are charged with overseeing, a conflict of interest that we don't allow in any other federal safety regime at all within DOT. So lastly, I'm just going to conclude by talking about one of the challenges that come with this funding, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists. One of the challenges that I am very focused on and got the Secretary engaged in very early is one thing that we had requested as part of the Obama administration plan was that we be allowed at the federal level to provide 100% of the funding for our state partners. Frankly, my concern was that the governors were not going to be able to match the dollars or would not be willing to match the dollars when you looked at the past record of them not providing any money at all, really, for these state safety organizations. I wanted us to be able to hit the ground running and give them the funding without strings of local financial commitment to get up and running and strengthen their capabilities. Congress went another way and made the federal funding for the state safety organizations an 80-20 proposition, like much of our capital programs, which is to say, I can't give a state funding for their SSO to staff up, get trained, and petition for new authorities unless I've got a governor ready to put up $1 for every 4 of mine. As a result, very shortly after MAP-21 was signed into law, like a matter of days, record time really for a federal agency to pivot here, Secretary LaHood, at my request, sent out a letter to all of the impacted governors asking them to start planning now, this was several months ago, to be able to match our funds so we could staff up these state safety organizations as needed. So that's sort of where we are federally. We're waiting for funding from Congress. We have lots of new and important authorities. We want to do this in a value-added way that improves the safety profile of what is largely a safe mode and does it in a way that does not divert funds from other critical needs. It's critical that we not, if you will, obsess on one very narrow vulnerability. One thing we do know is the goal of setting this up using a safety management system approach is built around the fact that each one of these transit agencies is different, and each one probably has its own unique greatest safety vulnerability. And if we do this right, we'll develop a system where each one of those transit agencies has the data, the information, and expertise to identify what their greatest safety vulnerability is. And then our job at the FTA will be to make sure they attend to it, that they continue to monitor it, and that hopefully through our new State of Good Repair program, which we got in MAP-21 and other areas, we are bringing the dollars to bear on where the risks lie. That's really where we're at the current moment. So I'm very pleased that we have three genuine experts sort of coming at this challenge from three different places. They are, he says, rifling his papers. There we go. They are David Genova, who's the Assistant General Manager for Safety, Security, and Facilities at the Regional Transit District in Denver, Colorado. Joseph Teixeira, who's the Vice President for Safety and Technical Training from the FAA, our partner agency in the ATO organization within the FAA. And Georgetta Gregory, who is the Assistant General Manager for Safety and Quality Assurance at the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, or MARTA, in Atlanta. Let me just say that Georgetta has already served, Georgetta proved our internal rule that if you're named to the TRACS committee, you are named in your own professional capacity. When we first named Georgetta, she was working for the SSO in California, and while she upset our coastal balance by moving east, she is nonetheless adding great value. So our first speaker is going to be David Genova. He'll be presenting on implementing a light rail safety program. The RTD in Denver has had one of the more recently built light rail systems with federal assistance and a lot of local funding as well. And it has taken many strong local steps to ensure a safe customer experience. Like I said, David is currently the Assistant GM for Safety, Security, and Facilities, and he has over 19 years of transit experience administering safety for capital programs for 5 light rail projects, 3 commuter rail lines, as well as the multimodal development at Denver Union Station. If anyone hasn't been to Denver recently, you should go downtown. It's a remarkable amount of construction that we're all doing to really, I can't think of, with a possible exception of Dallas, Dallas and maybe Seattle, another city that's standing up so much new rail capacity so quickly. And obviously, when you're moving that fast, you need to make sure you're doing it safely. And David is at the point of that spear, so we're glad to have him here today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter, for that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm going to just very briefly today kind of cover three areas in implementing an effective rail safety program. And first, I'm going to talk about how do you make safety the top priority at your organization. Secondly, I want to discuss a little bit about building safety into the capital side of your program. And then lastly, just touch on operations and maintenance. So making safety the top priority begins, of course, with top support from the board and the CEO. You know, not only their support, but their active engagement in what the organization's doing, and especially in regards to safety. Having a board committee that safety can report up and through, so the board is constantly being aware of what's happening in the organization in regards to safety and how they can be better engaged. We also have a high-level executive safety committee that consists of all of our assistant general managers in our organization, and that's really the body that administers and sets the safety philosophy and takes care of all the safety-related issues for the district. It's also important to have your priorities spelled out in a safety and security policy statement, of course signed by the Chief Executive Officer, and then usually attached to your system safety program plan, which is also another opportunity for the agency to really talk about the philosophy behind managing safety within that organization, and also being able to state your goals and objectives regarding safety. And then lastly, asset management and state of good repair becoming very popular for us to discuss in the last few years. And I think that that is critical because from where I come from and as far as the number of capital projects that we've had going on and a lot of rail programs, that I see it from a safety perspective is that if we're making the appropriate asset management and state of good repair starts with making the appropriate investment at the beginning. So build the project right and appropriately right out of the chute. Then we can go into capital programs. The first thing that I've listed a few things here that has been some of our experience on the capital side. I can't say enough about having appropriate safety staffing, both in terms of quantity and experience and background of the people that we have overseeing the safety. Design criteria is really critical. It's important for agencies to know what your requirements are, have them in an established and comprehensive design criteria, and then apply that design criteria as early as you possibly can, beginning way back in planning, hopefully during major investment studies, environmental impact statements, certainly preliminary engineering, and then through final design. Early involvement of operations and safety, of course, working collaboratively, which we have a very good process of collaboration within our own organization between our capital programs, our operations group, and our safety department. And then, of course, spelling out of the important types of system safety elements in the contract documents. So covering all of these areas, what kinds of submittals are going to be required for safety, how you're going to do certification. And then during the contract management phase, it's not enough to have all the requirements in your contract, but all these submittals are going to require pretty significant review and perhaps revision. And then, of course, design review is very important for agencies as you go through and reach your different milestones. So you're building in your requirements as you go. One of the challenges that I think I've seen in the light rail area, where I think MAP-21 has some opportunity to fill the gaps, is some addition of national standards, some reasonable, meaningful standards that we can apply so that we can have greater consistency. And then also, we sometimes get into debates with our stakeholders over some of what we would call our RTD design criteria requirements, where stakeholders will ask us the question, well, is that an RTD requirement or is that a federal requirement? And if as soon as we say something's a federal requirement, the conversation's over. But when it's simply a matter of being one of RTD's requirement, we seem to get into quite a bit of open-ended dialogue and negotiation. So I think there's great potential there. Our West Line light rail is getting ready to open in April 26th, this upcoming year. It's a 12-mile extension. It's our fifth one. And I just wanted to mention, you can just see there, I won't go through all of the information on the slide, but the different kinds of things we have in place on that project. This is the first light rail project we've had where we've had an active safety and security management plan. And I will say that that's been really effective because it's been able to really help us formalize and bring more importance and I think credibility to the safety processes like hazard analysis and certification and those kinds of things during the capital side of the program. One thing I want to touch on is how we kind of manage things on our capital programs from a committee and management structure. So I mentioned our Executive Safety and Security Committee, and you can see that that is the top committee on this chart. And then two boxes down, you'll see one that says the Safety and Security Working Group. Several projects ago, we just discovered that it wasn't enough to have safety listed as simply as an agenda item on the project, the weekly project management meetings. So we formed a specific working group that's cross-functional, consists of people from the capital project, engineering, operations, and safety. And we meet monthly, and we manage all of the safety and security aspects, review all the submittals, oversee the certification process, all the safety and security related elements that go into a capital project. And that's been highly effective at being able to raise the level of awareness there. On our West Line, the second box there, we've actually established an executive subcommittee about, I want to say 6 or 7 months ago. We just found that we had a few too many open items that the working group was not able to bring to resolution. So we pulled together a higher level group of decision makers in this executive subcommittee so we can address those open items quickly and get them resolved. We've also had a series of outside reviews, which I think is very important. Excuse me. For any program, I think oftentimes you can get a little too close to your own project and maybe get a little bit of tunnel vision. So it's helpful to have our peers from around the industry come. We had an NAPTA operational safety and readiness peer review. We just went through, I think, one of the early safety and security readiness reviews. That was by the Office of Safety and Security of FTA, and that process went quite well. I mean, I will say that being kind of new and being, I think, maybe one of the first agencies to undergo this and being close to opening, we had some concerns about the criteria in the review, but we found it very comprehensive, and a few recommendations came out of that review, but the good news is there were no game changers for us, and so we were glad to hear that. And then the regional office equivalent to that, the Readiness to Enter Revenue Operations, was another review we went through. So once, I think the important steps is once you've been through the capital side of building the appropriate investment, then it certainly makes operations go as smoothly as possible. But again, you can see some of the items that I've just listed there that are important for the successful implementation of a safety plan or program on the light rail side. And one thing I just want to mention is building alliance with your operations team, and then also with your state safety oversight agency. One of the programs that we have in place in Denver and in Colorado is we do a joint audit, a joint safety audit with our state safety oversight agency, and it really helps us foster a more collaborative working relationship and just a greater understanding on each side's roles and responsibilities. And then lastly, I'll just mention configuration management, having a system in place that once your system is built and you make changes, that you're able to review all those changes and track all of those changes. And then, lastly, I think the emphasis on asset management and state of good repair is going to be a tremendous help to us in making sure our systems are safe and reliable. You want to just come to the...
Well, yeah, don't go anywhere, because I'm going to give David just a couple of questions that came to my mind. He covered a lot of ground there, and I really appreciate him doing it and doing it in very quick areas. But here's a couple of questions I'd ask of him. First, on the issue of staffing, one of the things that we know and have not entirely figured out how we're going to solve this challenge. We know that as we try to propagate this safety management system approach specifically for transit, that we're going to get into a situation where everyone else is trying to hire away about the maybe dozen to 2 dozen people who really know what this is all about. And what we really need to do is grow the expertise of the industry writ large, whether it's the state regulator, the federal regulator, and most importantly, where the rubber meets the road on safety, the actual operators and the transit agencies. So I guess one of my questions for David, and I've got one more after this, is how do you think the FTA can be most helpful in growing the universe of the most skilled and knowledgeable professionals in this particular field?
Well, that's a really good question, and something that I think we've wrestled with as safety professionals, and Georgetta and I and others that have participated on various committees. We talk a lot about, where's our pool of candidates coming from. So I think helping the industry develop some curriculum that either a series of courses or classes that are tailored specifically to transit safety would be one huge help that agencies can get people through. And I'll give you an example. We just recently hired it's been a couple of years ago, but a gentleman that we hired as a system safety engineer. He was just very briefly out of school, had really no transit experience and not a lot of system safety experience, but I thought he had great skill sets and he was smart, and I thought, you know, he can learn system safety, and he's been with us a couple of years now, and he's doing a great job. But if we had, you know, the ability to, I think, put some folks through some curriculum, that would also be helpful.
I commend you for not mentioning his name lest someone try to hire him away from you. Well, one other issue that I think you might be able to speak to, and it's one that has worried me and worried the FTA, because we've seen it in a number of recent examples. So Denver is one of our, like I said, they're laying down a lot of new rail. We are a funding partner in the West Line. We are also a funding partner in Union Station. We've got a light rail and commuter rail and all of this going up in Denver at the same time. And as happened in a number of cities that were about the business of doing capital expansion at a time when the recession hit, local revenues tailed off. And they didn't necessarily, they had to go looking for discrete pieces of projects to take out for the purposes of cost savings. As we drove to a final full funding grant agreement recently with the new Honolulu Rail project, we had a couple of rounds of scope reductions in the project. Some of the things that they were proposing gave us some concern from a safety perspective. I could tell you when the new, now highly successful light rail system in Hampton Roads was being brought up and running, their ridership is blowing way through the ceiling of anything that anyone expected when the project was contemplated. But they also took out some elements, including something sort of resembling a positive train control system as a cost-saving measure. So what I'm trying to get at is, you know, the challenging question of how do we identify, how can we do a better job both as an industry but then as a regulator as identifying precisely the most safety-critical elements of a capital project that we, you know, would not allow to be taken out, and how do you think we can play a role in educating everyone on that?
Well, that's another good question. Of course, you know, those kinds of things when you're looking at scope, either deferments or scope cuts, and none of us want to do those types of things. Sometimes they are inevitable. I will state that, you know, the things that are near and dear to our hearts and our agency are what we have identified in our design criteria. And as we look at things that say may qualify or may be acceptable to defer or to cut, we do that collaboratively, and we reach consensus before we make any decisions on those things. But I think that, and I briefly mentioned this earlier, but I think one of the opportunities, though, in MAP-21 specifically in regard to this is the development of, again, reasonable standards and requirements of identifying those kinds of safety-critical requirements and having them built into the regulatory requirement in terms of standards. And I know that would certainly be a very challenging task, but I think it could start pretty high level and roll through, if that answers your question. Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you, David. Our next panelist is Joseph Teixeira. He is, as I mentioned before, Vice President for Safety and Technical Training at the FAA. I will tell you, we have looked to the FAA for leadership in a number of areas, really probably more than any other mode within DOT. They have taken the safety management system concept to a stronger place and instilled that culture within their, I'm not going to say their grantee base, but within the air carriers that they oversee and regulate. It has been a it is something that is also now playing itself out as other modes within DOT, including the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, seek to mirror the approach that the FAA has taken. Joseph was named Vice President of Safety and Technical Training at the ATO, the Air Traffic Organization, in the FAA in 2011. And as Vice President for Safety and Technical Training, Joseph is responsible for integrating a safety management system and safety standards into the ATO. He leads organizational efforts to manage risk assurance quality standards, instill an open culture of disclosure, educate employees, and promote continuous improvement. Joseph also leads the agency's technical training and certification of air traffic controllers and technicians. So I'd like to welcome Joseph and hear what he has to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Administrator Goffin. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you the air traffic experience in safety. We certainly have been in the business of regulation for a long, long time, but what this chart will tell you is that lately, and I mean since the early 90s, we really have moved beyond regulation in order to get safety improvement. So to walk you through this chart rather quickly, from the early 40s until the late 80s, we measured our safety performance by the number of accidents we had. And then so many improvements were made to the way we build airplanes that so few accidents were occurring, and so many of them were survivable, that we then began measuring fatalities per miles flown. And we're really now done with that, because we have so few accidents that measuring your performance is becoming impossible. So we're looking at ways of developing precursors. Those are those small violations of rules and procedures or small incidents that eventually manifest themselves into accidents, and trying to work on those preventive measures in partnership with industry rather than imposing new rules. So we're not saying that incidents are not important. They are, and we look at them, we investigate them, and when we are able, we put corrective actions in place. But what I'm also saying is that waiting for an incident or an accident to occur is reactive, and it's a bit too late. So our goal is to put things in place, i.e. proactive safety management systems and collection of data. I don't know how I can reinforce that. To actually improve your safety performance. So we have some simple ways we go about creating data and analyzing data into 4 different pillars. Our most valued pillar is the frontline employees. Those folks that operate the system day to day have a lot of information. So we've created processes, voluntary and confidential safety reporting systems where folks can report things that occur to them in a confidential way so that we can collect data in the safety department. Extremely successful throughout the industry. This is not just within the FAA. These programs are available to all of our regulated parties. Very, very successful. We don't put all of our hopes into folks telling us things confidentially, so deploying technology to analyze incidents and to detect incidents like software detection tools and other things are key to our ability to identify issues before accidents occur. So we have software in all of our automation processes so that the safety department gets automatically alerts of things that happen without having to require on individuals to report. We've also put a robust risk assessment program in place. If everything is important, nothing is important. So being able to prioritize your issues through a systemic risk analysis process is key to the validity of the value of a safety department or regulation. Again, there's not enough money to fix all the problems, so you have to have a way to prioritize. And this is the most difficult part of them all, is creating an adaptive organization that is willing to change and embraces corrective action. At the end of the day, SMS is all about finding problems and fixing them. It's really that simple. But getting them fixed is very difficult because it often requires people to change the way they do business. But it is crucial. So our safety management system is really this simple. We need people to report. We need to compile data, analyze it, identify trends and priorities, and getting them fixed. We know this works because before we had this system in place, we typically, on a through the 3 years prior to development of this system, we had approximately 5,000 reports from individuals. Putting these systemic safety management system in place, in the same time period, 3 years, we got 58,000 reports. So it's the way to do it, and without data, it's kind of hard to identify trends. And if you have good analysis of those trends, if you apply risk analysis to that data, you can then more easily identify what needs to get fixed. And that's what that data is also telling us. With the new proactive system, we are able and have been able to create appropriate corrective measures, which before we were just fearful of the numbers of incidents that we had. By doing this, we are able to correct our own safety barriers and our own safety rules prior to having any incidents. And that is our goal. In partnership with the industry, create the flow of information, partnerships in analysis, and partnerships in getting things fixed so that we can correct measures and trends before incidents occur. And I will stop there.
I don't have to stand anymore, but Joseph, there are two things that sort of came immediately to mind as I was listening to your presentation. The FAA, so you've really gone farther than any other part of DOT, and probably with the possible exception of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, sort of maybe any other part of the government in getting safety management systems embedded and taking hold in your regulated universe. The challenge that we're really trying to get our arms around in FTA, and one that I think you could help us with, is how do you instill that when you've got a universe of carriers with such vastly different budgetary strength, expertise, types of operations? So the FAA over its tradition has divided its, and this is probably the older way of doing business, its regulatory regime between the Part 121 carriers and the other carriers of different sizes and what type of aircraft they operated. When you're dealing with I guess the bottom line is, what advice would you have for us as we try and instill an SMS culture on a regulated universe as diverse as ours, both in expertise and financial strength?
So a proper SMS will be imposed through rulemaking. So we're going through that process now. But if you take away the label, we as an industry have been doing safety management for a long time collectively. And the way we've done that was we partner with all of the carriers, safety departments, FAA, the NTSB, and others. We put together a group to study accidents and the causes of those accidents. And then we ask folks to voluntarily implement corrective measures in the best way they could. That process led to a reduction of 80% in the fatal accident rate over a period of 10 years. So it's bringing people together, agreeing on what the causes were, and taking voluntary actions to fix the problems. Government did some, industry did some, and then continue to monitor, and when we didn't get the results that we'd hoped for, we go back to ask for more effective action towards doing that. Everybody did what they could. There were a lot of expertise that was brought to the table because some people did it, some people didn't. And then we had a priority. I mean, we didn't work on all 180 items at one time. We started with a prioritized system. We sort of went as long as the industry could afford it.
Well, thanks for that. One other thought I had, because frankly, one of the things you mentioned, I would have expected to be in the reverse. You talked about, after when you were talking about the criticality of data, that you basically implied that identifying the problem, or if you will, the risk area, was easier than actually changing the industry practice to address it. I would have thought or would have liked to have think that once you've actually got consensus of where the risk is, people would become willingly to the table to address it. So I'm wondering if you could give sort of an example, a particular example of where there was a clear understanding of the problem, but lack of buy-in to address it, and why that was, and how that might have any applicability to our challenges.
So identifying problems is indeed easy because there are so many of them. The difficulty we have is agreeing that those are the top problems. So each sector of the industry, whether you're a manufacturer or operator, will have their own set. And the solutions will also differ in terms of cost and what may be effective. So working on prioritization of issues and working on what each party can do to fix it is really the difficult part. Because many of the folks at the table will have to go back to their companies and justify the capital investment. And for that, they need everyone's help in identifying, yes, data, it's got to be data-driven, but then why it became the #1 issue, and why this solution, if it costs so much, why not that other solution that costs less?
Is this one where each individual carrier's highest #1 item was going to differ carrier to carrier, or is this something that you sought to sort of address industry-wide?
There's a consensus process that goes when you bring experts in the room, but yes, I mean, even today, every time I visit a carrier and I ask them, what are your top 5 concerns? They all have different concerns. They all have their things that they would like to get done or services that I need to provide, and they're all different.
Okay.
So bringing people together has an effect on influencing others. That's not just the government making the push.
Very good. Thanks. We'll be back to you. Let me make one overarching observation that I think is going to be important when we get into the more general discussion for all of the panelists. That slide that Joseph put up, which was really the extraordinary record of the FAA in reducing accidents and then reducing fatalities, and now really having them about the business of evaluating near misses. As I said in my opening remarks, the transit industry, by and large, is a very safe industry. And one of our challenges as having new regulatory authority, any new safety regulation that comes out of the FTA, like any other mode of DOT, will be required to withstand a cost-benefit analysis. Some folks in the aviation industry will complain. They're complaining tongue-in-cheek, but they're complaining, we don't kill enough people anymore to justify doing anything. And that is in part a cold-hearted sort of impolite way of talking about their regulatory challenge, and that is being able to justify through a cost-benefit analysis in an industry that is now largely very safe how each incremental improvement is cost-beneficial in terms of lives saved. We are starting with the green field. The FRA and the FAA have started with a voluminous rule book. You could paper the walls here of this entire room with airworthiness directives that the FAA has issued over the years, and those are in place until undone. But we are starting with, if you will, a blank slate and trying to and I think that's important in terms of making sure that that is where we make sure that we are adding value and not just adding process and regulation for the sake of it. Our third panelist is Georgetta Gregory, who I talked about a little bit already. Georgetta is going to be speaking on best practices in transit safety at MARTA. She is the Manager of Safety and Quality Assurances with MARTA. Her duties include direction and management of system safety, quality assurance, configuration management, document control, environmental safety, construction safety, and occupational safety and health. Georgetta began her tenure at MARTA in August 2010, and as I said earlier, prior to that, She was program manager of the California Public Utility Commission, which probably is still our strongest state safety organization of the 27 organizations in the states. They really are on a wholly different, they aren't necessarily where they need to be. Like any organization, there's always opportunities for improvement, but they are sort of heads and tails stronger than most of the other SSOs that we'll be working through, which is why their involvement, I think, was very helpful in the development of our regime. Let me mention one other thing about Georgetta that I mentioned to her when she stood up. Recently, this past summer, there was a referenda across the state of Georgia, and I think, was it 10 different regions, 9 different regions? 10 different regions where voters were invited to come to the polls at the very end of the summer to vote for a sales tax increase for investment in additional highway and transit projects. It had the unique name as T-SPLOST, T-SPLOST, which is a marketing faux pas on its face. But when they, unfortunately, from the perspective of transportation investment, that referenda passed in only 3 of the 10 regions, and it did not include the Atlanta region. A number of the projects that were slated for transit investment were not just transit expansions that were called on in Greater Atlanta, but also a number of important state of good repair projects for MARTA, which got voted down. And I mention that only because when you're the head of safety for a rail transit agency that is struggling mightily to get the necessary SGR investments made and struggling and failing in some instances, that responsibility is an even more daunting one. So we should all both welcome and pray for Georgetta Gregory as she comes up here to address us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for that, Peter, and I do welcome your prayers. I'm going to speak briefly about some of the accomplishments we've made at MARTA. As a legacy system, the safety program has evolved into a bona fide safety culture, and now we're hoping to expand that culture and adopt fully encompass the SMS principles that Joseph talked about. A committed leadership is the cornerstone in organizational safety. Everyone talks about safety being the #1 priority. Well, that's just not enough. It's got to be your #1 core value. At MARTA, I'd like to think it is our #1 core value, and we are making that emphasis more and more as each day goes by. And it has to be evident in your everyday business process. Adopting the critical value will lay the foundation for safety perfection, a commitment to zero incidents through business strategies and legendary customer service. Best practices include regular briefings with the chairman of the board and the board members and a direct relationship with the general manager, similar to what Denver has adopted. MAP-21 is going to enforce this critical element of a safety program by dictating that the board of directors signs off on the safety plans of the transportation agencies and requiring a direct reporting relationship with the chief safety officer and the general manager or the top executive of whatever your organization. Safety as a core value is not a simple achievement. It's a lot of hard work. And it involves everybody. The business plan must support safety in every aspect, and the first and most critical step is to engage the employees. There's not a quick fix or a one-stop shop for the initiative. It requires multiple communication platforms. We use social media, a monthly newsletter, an email newsletter that comes out several times a month, an interactive safety database, frequent listening sessions with the general manager and executive management, and a new video update from our new general manager, Keith Parker, that comes out every Friday afternoon. Recognition is key to keeping the momentum. MARTA annually recognizes safe operators with a celebration and patches that they can put on their uniforms that indicate how many years they've safely driven or operated a train. We're expanding this program to include other job functions throughout the authority as well. Employees are recognized for accomplishments in quarterly expanded staff meetings with the GM. The partnership that we've developed with our local union, the Amalgamated Transportation Union, is a cornerstone element of our safety program. Without this partnership, the best plans will not be effective. Without engaging your organized labor component and your employees, you're doomed for failure. Regular communication and collaboration with labor that includes safety at the top of each and every agenda is critical. Training, coaching, and accountability are the final keys to the kingdom. Safety training geared towards each job and functional area will shift the attitude from old school to safety as a way of life. And that really is what we're looking for. Safety as a way of life, doing the right thing for the right reason at the right time, every day, every time. Lifetime learning is the MARTA way. To support this, we've embedded a system safety officer, one of those very few precious resources that we found, but it was important enough to me to embed a safety officer in the Office of Training. That person's responsible for making sure that every training curriculum embraces safety and delivers that message, and to keep a finger on the pulse of the training and to make sure that that is delivered and that core value of safety is in that training. Accountability finishes the engagement of the employees. Safety as a core value dictates that you hold people accountable. And that accountability starts with the executive management team. It's also critical that you have an all-hazards approach. MARTA adopted an all-hazards approach back in 2005 with the advent of Part 659. The final rule laid a really good foundation for rail transit safety, but MARTA expanded that rule to include all modes of transportation, including buses and paratransit. How could you only address one piece of your system without encompassing everything? Elements of this approach include employee engagement, as previously mentioned, and a robust hazard management process that includes the Safety First database I spoke of, which is an interactive web-based tool for employees to report safety hazards as they identify them, and it's a closed-loop process. They get a response back from their supervisor within 5 days, or it automatically escalates to the next level. Each of the hazards goes through a robust hazard analysis, and there's a risk assessment assigned based on the military standard 882. We use this process to help us decide where to spend our money, where to put our resources, and which of the hazards require the most immediate attention. There's a hierarchy of safety committees and meetings that continually enforce our safety as the core value methodology, and this is one of those really good tools. It's proving to be very effective. We treat close calls or near misses as actual events, as actual accidents. We investigate those just as thoroughly as we would investigate a Fort Totten accident that was mentioned earlier. I'm not going to dwell on that too much because Joseph did share with you that whole process and methodology. We are just developing that in its infancy stages. We do plan to move into a voluntary confidential close call system as well. To achieve safety performance, safety data is critical. The safety data provides the justification for the enhancements in the safety program by illustrating cost effectiveness. I'm trying to go really fast here this afternoon, folks. Forgive me. I want to reiterate once again, safety is the core value as a key business performance component. While we all want to be compliant with regulations, being compliant is just not the goal. It's just not good enough. While an observation program may be a fine element, it will not be the sole method to achieve that safety performance, that prize. Policy statements and executive pontifications, they sound good from the podium, but they do nothing to enhance your safety. They will not get you there without solid organization. Caring about employees is important. It's important to morale. It's the right thing to do. But that's not going to get you there either. We have to have that safe working environment. That's what's really important to your employees and to our riding public. That'll contribute a whole lot more to employee morale, and people really do like accountability at the end of the day. We all like trinkets, but true recognition comes in the knowing you're doing the right thing, and we want to save that recognition for true safety excellence, not just for vague and run-of-the-mill safety numbers for minor accomplishments. Save it for true excellence. Personal safety culture, individual personal safety culture is the key element in achieving safety excellence. Like Uncle Sam says, I want you. It all starts with the individual employee embracing a personal safety culture at home and in the workplace. Peter failed to mention that I actually retired from Union Pacific Railroad. What I used to tell my employees there, when you come through that gate, I want your head cut in. I want you focused on the task at hand. I want you going back home just like you came through that gate. That is that personal safety culture, where they leave the baggage at the gate, they come in, they work safely. We've heard a little bit about transit asset management and state of good repair this afternoon. I want to thank our elected officials in the Federal Transit Administration for signing into law and starting the process to codify the importance of maintaining a good state of repair. MARTA began a fully integrated asset management plan back in 2009. We figure it takes 5 years to get a bona fide asset management plan in place, so we are well on our way. The plan is a systematic program with a methodology and a system for investment prioritization, aligning capital initiatives with strategic priorities and safety criticality. As a legacy system, we do have our challenges. Some days it seems like all the assets are screaming for attention, but there's just so much money. Through the use of condition-based asset replacement plan, we're making sure that those systems that are safety critical receive the attention first. This process keeps those things that keep you awake at night at bay, to make sure that we put the resources to those safety critical assets that need our attention today. And I, like Joseph, am going to stop there.
Well, thank you, Georgetta. I do have a couple of questions for you, and then we're going to invite the audience to participate robustly as we have a good amount of additional time. First, let me just mention, Georgetta, I didn't mention about your retiring from the Union Pacific because I didn't want anyone here to think you were old enough to be retired from anywhere.
I went to work when I was 12.
Oh, okay. That will explain it. Two questions. One, you just touched on one of them that I was thinking about, because as I mentioned when I introduced you, the challenge of struggling to get adequate state of good repair money while being responsible for the safety profile every day. And you talked about having a system for what you described as the safety critical investments. How does that work? How do you know? I imagine some of it is gut and some of it is data, and maybe you could share with us a little bit about how MARTA makes the decision about, with so many assets, like you said, crying out for attention, how you make the judgment as to what rises to the top.
We've adopted the process of risk analysis and hazard analysis using the military standard and recently I've done a lot of research with the European standard, which I think may lend it more to our business than the military standard. Each finding or asset is rated using that process. It's given a score, and that way we can prioritize. And I'd like to add that not only do we look at capital projects and state of good repair projects, we take that same approach with all findings and recommendations. If they come from an accident investigation, if they come from the State Safety Oversight's triennial review, if they come from an internal safety audit, or if they come from one of the peer reviews or other reports that we receive. We go through that process, and we use that process to rate capital programs as well as our corrective action plans. And as far as those state of good repair projects, 2 years ago, one of my first things was to make sure that we had safety represented on the capital program committee, so that they are voting members on that committee, and they have a role in really deciding where that money goes. Everybody's project's safety critical if you take a poll.
Well, then you talked a lot about capital investments, and that's what I asked about. But what about operating investments, i.e. training? I heard what you said about putting one of your treasured safety specialists into the training operation at MARTA. But in terms of how you prioritize what is, and I'm just assuming that training may be it, but even on the operating side, whether it's compensation, hours of service, or training, how do you figure out what is the most critical initiative from a safety perspective on the operating side?
That's a good question. That was not on the list, by the way.
None of these are on the list. I'm not using any on the list. Sorry.
We have a very structured hierarchy of safety committees at MARTA, starting with the General Manager Safety Committee, which is the Executive Safety Committee. Then we also have our Joint Health and Safety Committee, which is an equal partnership with management and union representation. And then, of course, the plethora of safety committees, the meetings throughout the agency. We use those as some of the key indicators on where we need to put our resources. You really need to listen to the employees. The boots on the ground, those are the people that can tell you really where the money needs to be spent. And by using this system and series of processes, I found that to be very effective. Also, those training programs that look at the workplace safety, that look at the individual employee's safety. One of the ones that comes to mind is bloodborne pathogen training. Recently, we had an event. It wasn't on MARTA property, but the victims came onto a MARTA bus, and there were bodily fluids on the bus. When the bus went into the facility for cleaning, we discovered that not all the folks that dealt with that had the proper training. So when you reach out to the employee and you say, I care about you, they entered this in our safety database, by the way. So now we've gone out and we've rolled out a more robust bloodborne pathogen training through all the job descriptions that we've identified that might be subject to that kind of risk, and awareness training for everyone else. Mm-hmm. These are the kind of initiatives you get your biggest bang for the buck.
Okay, I'm going to ask, thank you for that. I'm going to ask Georgetta one more question, but while I'm doing that, let me invite folks in the audience who have questions, observations, things they want to share. There's a microphone right up here. I don't know if there's one at the upper level. Maybe there's only just this one. But let me invite folks to come down while I ask Georgetta this one additional question. You're one of the rare beasts that we have here who has had experience both on the operator side and on the regulatory side. And in terms of, I'm sure when you made the journey from the CPUC to MARTA, just as any of us who sort of changed the nature of where we came from to where we are, you made some discoveries as to, oh, that's the reason why that is. I guess what I'm really driving at is how, as we stand up this regime on both strengthening the SSOs to do a much better job of regulating and enticing good and the best safety practices out of the regulated transit agencies, what do you think should be our highest priority for the SSOs, sort of the first lowest hanging, most important fruit there? And what do you think our highest priority should be for the transit agencies themselves?
The highest priority for the state safety oversight agencies absolutely has to come in the platform of training and certification. Without that, they will never have the credibility in the industry that their position dictates that they must have. They've just kind of, I like to think any new job you go into, you have to earn your stripes. You have to earn your credibility. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can demolish any credibility that your predecessor may have established there. So that, I think, is the number one thing for the State Safety Oversight Agency. As far as the transit agencies, it's a little more complex. Most of the safety staffs in the transit agencies are homegrown. They've come up through the ranks. And I speak for transportation, including railroad transportation, in this statement. Oftentimes, the safety departments have been the depository for perhaps not your most highly prized employees. We need to shift that paradigm 180 degrees. Those folks in the safety department have to be the best. They need to be the most They need to be the most trained and certified in their field. Now, that does not mean that they will become subject matter experts in every aspect of the business. You can't do that. But they do have to become experts in safety management systems, in OSHA, in industrial health and safety, and they do need a comprehensive understanding of system engineering. That is absolutely critical. So that training element and certification for the transit agencies is also going to be very valuable. Personal belief of mine is you need a complement of subject matter experts with engineering. You have to have those two elements in your safety department to truly have a robust and effective safety department.
Great. Thanks. Ed, are you going to join us? Well, Ed Reskin is going to come to the microphone, and for those of you who don't know Ed, he's head of the SFMTA, formerly known as MUNI in San Francisco, so I'm glad he's going to participate. Let me just make one observation about Georgetta, which is, again, one of the issues that we're wrestling with. So you heard me mention earlier that some of the SSOs that we have that are expected to take on this responsibility through our funding to build expertise and oversee and enforce new federal regulations were sometimes just handed as a collateral duty to someone within a state DOT. Part of my challenge in articulating what we're expecting of new SSOs is obviously going to have to be to articulate some of them that this is the skill set that we require, and none of you, including you, Mr. Director, have it. And that's going to be an interesting conversation, as you might imagine, because we can't just assume that the person in place really has the skill set given the change we wanted to bring about. But Ed, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, thank you. As a great panel, a lot of food for thought there. What I have is, I guess, really a comment. As we think about how we're going to expand and heighten the safety kind of regulatory environment and oversight for transit, what I would encourage that we think about was really inspired in part by the FAA's approach, and also with MARTA thinking about the idea of compliance versus performance. What I've seen, being relatively new to the industry, is that our safety oversight, both internal and external, tends to be compliance oriented. It's, do we have the right policies and procedures in place? Are we adhering to the policies? Are we following the procedures? And that's absolutely essential and important, and I wouldn't suggest that we don't need to focus on that stuff. But I see less in terms of how do we actually get better? How do we be proactive and not just meet those minimum standards, but how do we look at data, whether it's actual collision data or other precursors, and I don't know that we have even defined what those precursors might be. But we all have probably a lot of data that we could be using in a much more strategic way. And as an operator, I would get a lot of value from both our internal safety folks and from our SSO if we were really getting people who could come in and take a look at how we're performing and give us real guidance in terms of how we could be performing better, not just how to get in compliance with the basic requirements.
Well, absolutely. I mean, an SMS approach, if done correctly, and maybe Joseph, you have some observations about this. Really, there's no ceiling. There's no point at which you are, you get to check the box and say, I'm 100% safe today, I can go home. There's always that added element, that additional risk to be taken down. And Joseph, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. And Georgetta used to be Muni's safety regulator when she was at the CPUC, so she might have some thoughts as well.
I picked up on, you said that we have a lot of data in the industry. So one of the roles of the regulator is to provide for safety of that data. So we have Part 183 protection and other things so that those pilots...
You might want to explain that. This is a transit crowd.
So we've been able to get congressional laws that provide for protection of freedom of information releases of safety data and provide for confidentiality of that information so that we won't use it for regulatory purposes if the airlines brings it forward voluntarily. So we create an incentive for the carrier to share data in a way that it's outside of the reach of regulatory sanctions, so long as we can see that the regulated party is actually acting on good faith on that data. So I think there's a role for government in creating a safe place where people can share data that's otherwise not required by regulation. But that is where the gold mine is, right? The operator's data, the employee's knowledge, that's where you're going to find your precursors, whatever they are. But no one is going to share that with you, and no one is going to have a robust SMS with all that data in unless there is a means of protecting that data for safety purposes only. So that's all I would add to that discussion.
Yeah, this is an issue that we're going to face. I don't know how soon, but my recollection is that Part 183 protection needed to be done as a matter of federal law for purposes of tort protection. But this is, as you can imagine, as transit agencies that are sued regularly for incidents of a variety of severities. This whole challenge, and my chief counsel, Dorval Carter, isn't here because I think he was doing another panel, but the whole issue of how we insist on getting the most robust data in an environment where people feel comfortable using it for its optimal safety protection purposes is something we're going to have to work through. That we have different state laws right now from state to state. In Ohio, just as an example, I won't mention the agency, but we've had the plane dealer has been on the case of trying to get RTD safety data out there, and they have certain protections in the state of Ohio, but that's not necessarily true, one state down the road. So it's very challenging. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Georgetta had an observation, then we'll get to you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that last question. There's some really good stuff in MAP-21. I've spent a lot of time reading it. It's not as long as the healthcare law, but it's a really good law. One of the things in there directs the Federal Transit Agency to develop performance measurements. And I'm looking for the FTA to take some of the mystique out of performance measures so that we can move more towards a performance-based system. I think that's going to be a real big plus.
Well, and to add to that, we've also, again, consistent with what the Obama administration requested, we have gotten away from our discretionary bus program and now have a pooled rail and bus state of good repair grant program that also involves performance measures as it relates to state of good repair. It requires us to define state of good repair as something my Deputy Administrator, Teresa McMillan, having worked at the project deployment and level in California, is helping with a great deal. For all of the observations that MAP-21 was just a 2-year law that kicked the funding challenge down the road, all of that's true, but actually in many ways, and particularly in public transit, it really was a game changer in terms of our role. The way I've described it to our employees is between the new safety responsibility, the new focus on state of good repair, and things like performance measures that are also embedded in that law. They have really shifted the role of FTA as being responsible for the passenger experience in a way that it never has been before. And we need to rise to it. We need to take it quite seriously. We're just not a financier. We bear some responsibility for that passenger experience. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm Arun Vora with Mini LLC. In the last 6 months, I've met the professional staff of the London Underground metro system, Berlin, and Beijing. In the last 10 years, I've walked on the tracks and met the professional staff of almost all the major US subways. So I'm talking about subways. The big difference that I see here, US subways and overseas subways, is, at least the ones that I went to, the overseas subways value safety. The public there demands it. If you can somehow motivate the public and the metro management to value safety, provide reliable and safe transportation, it's a huge challenge, but if you can do that, I think the problem will basically solve itself. The issue is all that stuff costs money. They have other things to do. They've got to put the silver line in, whatever. They let go of the standard thing that they should be doing. But if you can somehow motivate them, I think it will take care of itself, with your help, of course. Thank you.
Well, let me dig down a little bit. So I don't think anyone would stand up and say that there's a general manager that doesn't care about safety, but I think what you're saying, from your observations, you don't think they care about it enough. And you said that we need to motivate them. So what do you think, from your observations, are the principal tools in terms of how we can better motivate them? You can just probably everyone can hear you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
The London Underground people told me that when they have a glitch on the subway system there, they get a phone call from the Lord Mayor of London. That never happens here.
Well, now we have the spokesperson for the general managers of the transit agencies of the United States, Mike Milanofi. So why don't you go ahead and help explain that.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. We're happy to move on to my question. Thinking about Michael Milanofi with APTA, about the venue that we're presenting in today, and thank you for this panel. It's outstanding, and I applaud everyone on this panel for sharing these thoughts. But thinking about where we're here today, can you talk a little about the role of research in advancing the state of the art? We've talked a lot about compliance today, but obviously as we've got new technologies coming forth, as the industry puts new technologies, whether it's rolling stock or facilities or whatever it is, and our users change technology and apps, how do we advance the technology? How do we advance our research and our state of the art to make sure that not only are we meeting the needs of safety requirements as those things change, but actually get ahead of that? If you could speak to that a little bit from the different venues, I think that would be very helpful to this group. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe Joseph may have some thoughts, but I'm specifically interested in what David and Georgetta may have as folks at the operating level, as what information is not out there where either federally sponsored research or industry sponsored research can really help you tackle this challenge.
I think from where I see things in implementing newer technologies and things and what might be available, really, is the analysis that needs to be done behind newer systems, particularly a lot that are everything's software and hardware driven these days. And so I think a lot of times as safety professionals, when we can't put our hand, when it's not real tangible for us, it makes it very challenging for us to accept that. So what kind of system testing and parameters can we put into place to assure that those kind of technological developments, that we can implement them safely?
A thought that comes to mind for me is one of Marta's projects, our train control systems upgrade project. We're putting in a whole new SCADA system to kind of offset some of the findings from the Fort Totten accident. However, we had started this before that. I want to go on record saying that. There are many elements of that project that are very difficult to put your finger on, as Dave mentioned. A lot of this is information technology driven, and it's changing. It's a 5-year project for us. By the time we get it installed, the technology is going to be leaps ahead of it already. So that's one of the biggest challenges in research and development, I think.
And Joseph, do you have any thoughts from your experience in FAA in terms of where the unanswered questions were in the aviation universe that we may similarly be challenged by?
We spend an awful lot on research, as you know. We're going through a huge transformation called Next Gen. Many of you may have heard about it. We are digitizing all of our systems. We are moving all ground-based equipment to satellite-based. We're going through a huge transformation. And the biggest challenge that I would say for research, and it's not just research, is research, acquisition, and deployment. It takes too long. By the time we get through our acquisition management system, the industry has already gone 2 or 3 generations of software or hardware. So we need to fundamentally change the way we research and acquire technology, because technology itself moves at a very different speed. So unless we do that, we are just wasting money, because the things that were researched from me 10 years ago, I don't want that anymore. I want something different. I mean, I'm the operator. I'm saying is I can do it better, cheaper, but you know the system is moving, and now I can't get out of that system. So that's the biggest challenge for me.
Well, thank you. You know, this is actually a great segue to Vince's closing remarks, and it is because in choosing, when we never knew when MAP-21 was going to be finalized, and I think it's fair to say that when MAP-21's conference report was actually filed, the majority of Washington D.C. would have bet against it. But it was a breakthrough. It did happen very quickly there at the end. And while we'll be doing a national search eventually for a new associate administrator for safety and oversight for FTA, I needed to appoint someone right away to get into that job and get this initiative moving. And I chose Vince Valdez, who was my associate administrator for research and innovation. I did that not only because of the thoughtfulness he brings to the job, but also because he knew how to tap the research capabilities that we did have to do this right. Vince is going to give us some summary remarks to close this out with an explanation of what the FTA's near-term plans are to implement our new MAP-21 responsibilities. Thanks.
Oh, thank you very much, Peter. I guess earlier, I guess you had said we're the dog that's caught the truck, so I guess that makes me the FTA's pit bull, right? Sure, as Peter pointed out, I'm the acting associate administrator for safety right now, but my previous job was as the research associate administrator. And in answer to Michael Milanofi's question, I'm also very interested in that link, and everything I'm doing right now in the safety office to kind of roll out the new program really looks to making sure that the research office is very well integrated with the safety office and with the safety priorities. A lot of the things we need to be doing are, you know, kind of the things that are front leading, are going to be anticipating what the industry is going to be needing, working with the industry. As Joseph said, I don't want to be in a situation, you know, whether I'm in safety or in the research office, where we're kind of behind the power curve. So excellent question. Thanks. Checks in the mail. Really, what I wanted to do today was kind of go over a number of slides. And again, Andy Warhol used to say you have 15 minutes of fame. I really kind of have 5, so I'm going to fly through these slides. What I wanted to do really was go over kind of some of the basic premises of MAP-21, what we're finding. When MAP-21 was signed back in July, we really knew that we were going to be sipping through the fire hose. This is a lot of work for FTA because it represents a sea change for us, as it does for the industry. So Peter had pointed out we're not going to be necessarily reinventing or copying anyone else's rule book or anyone else's procedures. We have to look at this as an opportunity because we really are working with a clean sheet of paper, and how often does government have an opportunity to do that? The first kind of premise of MAP-21 really is broad applicability. The law applies to all public transportation providers. It involves our 5307, 5311 funding subrecipients. And it really looks at the state safety oversight agencies that we have experience with, but again, this is not 659. We're going a step further. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Again, as Joseph had pointed out, an SMS approach really is kind of tailored to the individual needs of every agency, and it's particularly important in our case because we have a very diverse industry. Obviously, we cover everything from soup to nuts. We cover bus service, heavy rail, light rail, even ferry service. So we have to have a system in place that's really going to kind of tailor itself to the needs of each individual provider and the particular mode that we're talking about. Lastly, and most importantly, and Peter has made this clear in a lot of his discussions with us, as well as discussions externally, is that this is a new era. This is not necessarily our 659 rule reinvented. It's a whole new kind of sea change for us, so we need to respond to that. And what that means is really kind of a cultural shift at our agency. So what does MAP-21 specifically say? We're working through in detail what that really means. Obviously, it's it's a straightforward legislation, as Georgetta mentioned, but we really do want to make sure that we're understanding everything that MAP-21 means for us as well as the industry. We're talking about new authorities and new processes that are going to be rolling out over the next few months. Now, as Joseph had mentioned previously, a systems management approach, a real SMS approach, really undergirds what MAP-21 is saying. MAP-21 is, again, a process whereby, or MAP-21 is a legislation that really gives us the flexibility to look at how we need to provide, kind of the guidance to the industry. And so with that, we really are looking at making sure that the industry, that we communicate with the industry, that we make sure we have the mechanisms in place that are going to respond to industry needs, and that we're not going to necessarily reinvent or apply the FRA rule book or any other existing rule book. This is, again, a clean sheet of paper. Now, there are some very basic premises to MAP-21, some programmatic elements that are emerging from MAP-21 that I wanted to talk to you about this afternoon. The first one being a national public transportation safety plan. And again, that's the manifestation of a systems safety approach that gives a national context. What are we talking about in terms of safety performance criteria? How are we defining state of good repair? What are minimum performance standards for public transportation? Again, this umbrella document, this umbrella approach based in SMS really is made manifest through the national plan. The other major element that really emerges from MAP-21 and that really kind of talks to the individual agencies is the public transportation agency safety plans. And again, those are agency level plans. Those are strategies for identifying risks and minimizing exposure, performance targets based on safety performance criteria, and again, that culture, making sure that training is provided for local agencies, making sure that the resources are there in order to be able to carry out the safety mission. Again, this becomes a very kind of basic operating premise of what MAP-21 is speaking about. MAP-21 also calls out specifically Public Transportation Safety Certification Program. Again, that resource that Georgetta had mentioned earlier and that David had alluded to as well. Again, the skill sets that are needed at the local entities, at the local level to really carry out the mission. What kind of skill sets do we need with the SSOs as well? Making sure that there's a continuity and a consistent level of knowledge across the country. And that's where we play a role, as well as the funding element that Peter had alluded to. Again, this MAP-21 recognizes that funding and that resources need to be put into this in order to get us up to the standard. As before, again, the SSO program is revised through MAP-21. FRA, this is, again, not an FRA rule book. This is a new process whereby we will be working with the SSOs to make sure that they have the skills and the knowledge to develop and deliver the program that we're talking about. It's one of the centerpieces of MAP-21. And again, it establishes kind of the working operations between FTA at the state level. Again, we're talking about new partners and working with states, working with the SSOs, working with the entities, the operators, to make sure that the program is delivered as developed. Again, Peter had mentioned how this is a very large change for FTA as well as the industry. We're on the hook to deliver a program with new complexities, new requirements in terms of data requirements, in terms of the analysis of that data that we've never done before. And so again, the onus is upon us as well as the industry to really develop these elements so that we can deliver the program in an effective manner. Again, an SMS approach being at the very kind of core of this, but also the skill sets that we're going to need within FTA, as well as a new office and new kind of way of thinking about safety at FTA. So over the next few months, we're going to be rolling out a number of webinars. This is a work in progress. Obviously, this is evolving very quickly. And I encourage everyone here and others, as you go out and speak to people about safety in our industry, I encourage everyone to really kind of stay tuned to what we're doing in terms of webinars and outreach and information. We are not doing this in a silo. We're not doing this without our stakeholders' involvement. And we will be rolling out a series of outreach programs and webinars and mechanisms so that we're receiving the information that we need to set up a program that really is reflective of what the industry needs and what MAP-21 dictates, and that really is responsive to the safety mandate. I think it's also important to note that transit safety has the very high attention of the administration as well as Congress. And so by the time we have to roll out the first report to Congress 3 years from now, I expect that we will have a very robust program and can point to successes within the industry and working with all the operators. Any questions?
I'm just going to echo one thing that Vince mentioned. We are determined, as I've said a number of times, to do this in a fashion that enhances safety, adds value, and does not just add process and cost. That said, as Vince also made clear, we have responsibilities. One slide he did not put up there in the interest of time, but we have a number of regulatory deadlines, as the authorizing committees in Congress also lay upon us, and we're going to do our darn best to meet every one of those deadlines. And we also have a full-blown national safety plan and other requirements that we need to launch. To do this in the optimal, most reflective way, could potentially take more time than we'll have. But we're gonna meet our deadlines. The reason I mention that is, as Vince mentioned, we're going to be doing a lot of outreach as part of this initiative. At the same time, with the threat of sequester looming across us, the agency is largely grounded in terms of its travel around the country. So please don't wait for us to come to a conference near you. Please reach out to us. Please monitor those webinars. Please encourage people to participate robustly. They are going to be one of the principal ways, not only that we spread the word on what we're doing, but also get input from the community as to how to best go about this. This session has been very valuable to us already, but there'll be others. Then if you go to our website, we have a whole separate page on MAP-21, which actually speaks to all of our ongoing MAP-21 activities. You can, at the MAP-21 page, sign up for what's called the Gov delivery function, which means you'll get an email every time FDA posts something new on MAP-21. It's one of the ways I stay on top of what we're doing, though I like to think that I know going in. I say all that only because this is going to be an important process and an important dialogue with a great many stakeholders in academia, in the transit operator community, in the regulatory community, and it's largely going to be digital. And we need everyone to participate that way and not wait, like I said, for us to come to a conference near you. Let me thank our panelists. I really appreciate them taking the time, as well as thanking our visitors who contributed. This is going to be a work in progress. This will not be the last you hear about it. But as I said, let me strongly encourage everyone who has an interest to stay in the dialogue as we move forward. Thanks, everyone, for coming.